Your smart apartment advisor here, welcoming you to another weekly client call. It's Friday the 19th of June. Welcome everybody. I'm glad to have you. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to just start with a little bit of the current events. I've been in the paper and the news a lot. On Thursday I was quoted in a front page article on the Chronicle about the falling rents, and there was the premise of the article had to do with tenants ditching their leases, but it wasn't exactly true. I haven't had a lot of situations where people are leaving leases that have a term, but I do have lots of situations where people are leaving San Francisco based on lack of employment or not needing to be here anymore because their companies don't require them to be nearby. So that was one, and then based on that, I had a call with KPIX Channel 5 on a similar topic. It was funny, the reporter from Channel 5 called the same sources from the Chronicle article, and it was a similar sort of a talk. But it leads me to my first topic of conversation today, which is really about how we're going to survive during this time and maintain your rents. And part of what I was talking about was how a lot of what landlords really want in this business is to keep their rent that's on the books at the highest level possible. And so even if the rents are going down by 10 or 15 or 20%, that is a temporary situation, and we prefer to give away a month or even 2 months of free rent in order to keep the rent at the level that we're talking about. So if the rent's $3,600 a month, if I give away a month's free rent, that's effectively a $300 decrease in rent over the course of 12, 13 months. And so the point of that exercise is to decrease the cost of the deal for the tenant over the course of the time. And this really works best for tenants who are in place, who are asking for a reduction instead of moving into a cheaper unit. And it has not proven to be as much of a enticement for new tenants. We have vacant units that we're currently marketing, offering a month's free rent, and people aren't really that motivated by that. And so we do have to lower the rents when we have vacant units. But in order to keep tenants around, we want to preserve the base rent and give free rent on the front end. And we are putting language into our leases at Denise's advice that specifies that this is based on the current pandemic. It is not a response of some permanent market change, and that this will not be considered a change in the tenant's base rent for the future, so that the annual rent increases from here on out, starting in 2021 or 2022, whenever it becomes okay again to have a rent increase because the market demands a rent increase or allows for an increase, we're allowed to do that without somebody coming along and saying, well, I actually got a month's free rent, so my base rent should be, in the scenario that I gave, $3,300 instead of $3,600. And so that's part of where we're at with marketing. It's part of where we're at with retaining our good tenants that we have now. Anybody who's had a lease that's been signed in the last 2 to 3 years is really kind of in line. We haven't had big increases in rent in the last 24 to 36 months. And so anybody who's got a lease that's a couple of years old is probably going to be looking around and seeing other units in the same building. But I've had a few situations where tenants have asked me for rent decreases while telling me that they're going to be leaving. And I appreciate that they are not going to just sign the lease, get their money and run. But at the same time, if I can't get some sort of an agreement that the tenant's going to stay, if I can't get, I know I won't have to deal with this unit turning over for another year, I'm not that interested in giving a discount. So there's some give and take, there's some back and forth. But, with that, I think what I'd like to do is introduce Denise to give us a little bit of the background on the legal maneuvering that goes with that and what the potential problems could be. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Preston eviction ordinance and the other legislation like Scott Wiener's SB 939 that was thankfully voted down. And I couldn't believe Scott was doing that, because Scott's been pretty good as an ally for our industry in general, but I understand where he was coming from, but I still thought that was a rather heavy-handed way to go about it. So anyway, with that, let me introduce Denise and put her on the screen and have her talk a little bit about the ins and outs and mechanics of free rent for retaining good tenants.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to also give an update very quickly with respect to the moratorium updates. So currently there was a mayor's order that came out, I believe, June the 5th, with respect to commercial tenancies now being, there is no way to evict a commercial tenant for non-payment of rent due to COVID financial concerns until after July 31st of this year. So they are protected. Then, unfortunately, the supplement number 12 to the mayor's order with respect to residential tenancies has confirmed that she is simplifying, literally simplifying the process. And now we may not evict until December of this year for any non-payment of rent for COVID-related issues. That does not mean the other just cause reasons can't be utilized. It's just anything pertaining to financial hardship due to COVID, you may not terminate for unlawful detainer. So that's the simplification we've just received.
Denise, can I ask you a question about that, the mechanics of non-payment of rent related to COVID?
Yeah.
Because I've had some situations where people ask me, things like, gee, how do we know if it's COVID related? And the fact of the matter is, hang on one second. The fact of the matter is that I get the feeling you can file a lawsuit, but you would have it thrown out if the tenant provided evidence that was adequate for a judge to show that it is, that it's related to the COVID-related crisis. Is that you could file a lawsuit and then have a judge throw it out if the tenant provides paperwork that says it's non-payment of rent because they've been affected by the crisis?
Correct.
Okay.
The fact that they have, it's a complete defense. If there's a complete defense to unlawful detainer processing, if they are able to provide documentation confirming that their inability to pay rent pertain to COVID-related loss.
Okay.
And there's a million different ways to provide that information, including the loss of roommates.
Right. And we have a situation with some tenants who contacted us based on one roommate, and we had three residents living in the unit. I think John may have called you about this one. 3 residents living in the unit. They're all tenants. They all have the ability to pay the rent. They had it set up where one person was paying the rent. They asked for a deferral of rent because one of the roommates had lost their job, but the other roommate kept paying the full rent for 3 months and then came back to us and asked for a retroactive deferral, which was like, you want the rent money back? Like, how can you say that you're not able to pay the rent when you did pay the rent?
That's right.
Okay, so in that circumstance, there's not a way they're going to come back and say, well, not like we're going to evict them, right? But they wouldn't be able to just stop paying the rent and say, well, we can't pay the rent because we lost our jobs when they've been paying the rent and they didn't even know it.
Right. Well, that was a very unusual circumstance, and that was
Yes.
To your benefit. And as I explained to John, whoever had the deferment needs to go back to the roommate paying by accident because he stopped the automatic payments.
Right.
And tell that roommate that he or she was going to pay the person paying the rent. Why was it coming out of RMC's pocket or the owner's pocket? It has to.
Right.
Yeah. So you all were just the middleman, so to speak, and they need to work it out themselves. But the other shoe hasn't dropped with that one because it's quite possible that next month they're all going to come back and say, oh, we can't pay the rent. And irrespective of the fact that whether they could or not, if they say it.
I can't do anything going forward, but I'm certainly not going to give them their money back going backward.
That's correct.
Right. Anyway, so continue.
So
we're talking about 3 months rent.
Yeah. So that's that issue. So as you had indicated, there was the question about whether you can give 3 months rent, taking into consideration the Park Merced debacle a number of years ago.
Right.
Whereby the city and county said you can't give free rent because you're resetting the rent. there's specific language in one of the mayor's orders, and I'm pretty sure it's number 12, but I literally recite it in all the documentation that indicates that you're creating an agreement pursuant to COVID-19 moratorium and the mayor's orders. And pursuant to the particular language in that order, you are not waiving the ability to maintain the base rent and future rent increases once the orders and the moratorium for said orders are lifted. So
Okay.
that's in the lease. Now, in the addendum and the agreement. Now, we all know that anybody can sue anyone for anything in this great country of ours. So the fact that you've said that doesn't mean that the tenants would still not try to argue, wait a minute, I don't have to pay. You've reset the rent. But it's pretty clear evidence that it would be pretty, I would doubt that first it would go to the rent board, presumably, and then it would escalate to San Francisco County Superior. I would find it very difficult to believe that in good faith you were trying to do the right thing at the time of the crisis, that's going to be held against you. But we'll see. I mean, there's no guarantee, as we all know.
Right.
So now with Preston's legislation, all supervisors but one voted in favor of it. It now goes to the mayor. The mayor must sign it. The day it becomes law, there's going to be a lawsuit to enjoin the legislation because we believe San Francisco County is a county. It's not the state. The state has not ordered that type of remedy for counties. And so we are suggesting that there's precedent set by the state. They may not violate that precedent. And we need an emergency decision from the San Francisco Superior. And if not, it goes up immediately to the appellate division, the appellate court, that essentially says that there is a possibility that tenants will rely on this law that will ultimately be thrown out, and we need your immediate response, court, judicial branch, as to whether or not it is lawful that what San Francisco County did. We don't think it is.
Right.
We think that we are going to, the property rights bar and property rights owners will be successful in that litigation.
Well, I guess we'll see.
Sorry, and just to recap, the Preston litigation all pertains to total forgiveness.
Right.
You may not be evicted with respect to non-payment due to COVID financial hardship. And
one of the things that was interesting about that was our friend Nicholas Paleologos has been on these calls. He, as part of the objecting to the Preston ordinance, wrote emails to the supervisors, and he wrote to Supervisor Haney's office in District 6. And he actually said, he said something like it's bad for landlords. And an aide in the office wrote back to him, which is interesting in and of itself. But they wrote back to him and said, it does not alleviate the tenant's responsibility to pay the rent. It simply means they can't be evicted for not paying it. And I'm going, so how else do you collect the rent? What else are you going to recover if you can't get the money and you can't get possession?
Well, presumably you would be able to get a judgment, and that judgment is good for 10 years, and then you chase that tenant wherever they are on that judgment. I mean, it's nonsensical, because what will happen is that people will be devastated to a point that if they don't take action, if the court doesn't take action to either confirm or deny it very quickly, tenants are going to rely on it to its detriment. And as it works its way up, all the way to potentially the California Supreme Court, the Supremes are not going to like this law, because otherwise it's going to open the door to all 58 counties. So they have to stop it.
Right.
That's the concern. Even with the tenant bar, there are tenant attorneys who are saying, oh my God, this is a nightmare. We're going to be inundated with people that we're not going to be able to help, because they will have spent all the rent money, and now they're looking at judgments. Right.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how long it takes to unravel the legality of that. But we're on top of it for now.
Yes, we are.
Oh man! And then let's see, SB 939. That was the Scott Wiener state bill that said that commercial tenants, small commercial tenants, could not be evicted for non-payment of rent. And that got shot down at the state level. He vowed to continue fighting for small commercial tenants. I just can't believe anybody would be evicting their commercial tenants right now, even with no rent, because I'd rather have a commercial tenant in possession who might come back and want to operate their business there instead of a vacant commercial space that you may never get rent for. I mean, I guess maybe if you suspect shenanigans, perhaps.
And to your point about why Scott did that, it's all political posturing, first of
Right.
all. And I'm sure that he also knew that there was some provision by a Republican in the state of California who was going to present documentation to the committees and other ideas to the committee, whereby the state of California was going to assist in bailout monies to the landlords.
Right.
But it never got to the point that it even went to committee with Scott's bill. It was not even considered.
Right.
It was just completely denied. So he got the press he wanted. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And then it went nowhere, which is, you know.
Hey, I'm sorry, I can hardly hear her. I tried texting you. I didn't want to interrupt, but I can't hear her very well.
No, I know it's a little faint, and we can't really figure it out right now. We're sorry that it's a little faint. I can hear her fairly well, and I think it'll come through on the recording. So I will get the YouTube video, and we will make sure that it's good on the YouTube video. But for now,
okay.
It's the best we could do. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. Thank you.
It's okay, no problem. So that's kind of where we're at legally. What is there anything else interesting going on that we should talk about or know about as rental property owners in San Francisco and the Bay Area?
Well, I just want to bring everyone's attention to and applaud Mike Kelly of Walkup with the lawsuit in federal court to remove all the tents outside, primarily Hastings. Hastings hired him to bring a lawsuit in federal court based on nuisance and also health concerns of all the homeless that were encamping all over the city. And he was successful in a settlement whereby they were required to remove them very practically and pursuant to a particular process by a certain date. And he is getting all kinds of hell from all the different tenants' rights activist groups because they were claiming that they were not participating in the settlement. But that's the only other very, very positive property rights.
Are they claiming that people camping on the sidewalk in tents are tenants? Are they confusing the word tent and tenant for one another?
Well, there's a whole other issue about all this. The city and county is taking over the hotels, the long-term, the HCO hotels,
right, that
are subject to the long-term tenancies, and they are putting homeless in them now. And so the issue is all of those folks who are living in tents are now going into the SROs, and that is being used with emergency monies. And the individual SROs are just being inundated with money. They're just
right,
plowed with money. So it's, again, the homeless is an industry here, and it's something that is very, very, very difficult to deal with because there's so many people with their fingers in the pie. It's very sad, but that's what's going on. And
what are we going to do when all the money dries up from the emergency? I mean, it may be a long time.
Well, this is the thing. We know there's going to be a tax cut across the board, 10% automatic. The mayor has announced that for next year's budget. Automatic 10% cut for every single government service that is receiving the San Francisco County funds. So how are they getting the money for these emergency agreements? Anyway, it's just the politics run amok.
Yeah, and the budgeting is such a complex process. It's above my pay grade, that's for sure. Well, anyway, that's thank you very much. That's really helpful, and I think gives us a sense of where we're at and maybe where we're going. So with that, I think this week Josh is going to take a week off from doing a deal of the day. But in my email on Monday, I'm going to include some links to the previous deals that Josh has discussed, and then we're going to start back up next Wednesday with more potential properties to talk about and just have a conversation about what opportunities are in the investment market during a crisis, and talk a little bit about that. Josh, did you have anything else you wanted to add to the discussion today? Any other topics?
Yeah, so I mean, part of the what I'm going to do, part of what I looked at in San Francisco, I wasn't thrilled about for what I was kind of seeing. And I'm going to pivot actually to the East Bay, just to share a couple of deals going on over here. We're having more leasing success with apartments in the East Bay. So the market seems better for finding tenants and for apartment buildings in general. So, you know, I know that's not great news for San Francisco property owners, but for people interested in pivoting and potentially hedging a bit on San Francisco, I think there are some opportunities there. So I'm going to bring on Wednesday, I'll share probably in Oakland, maybe a Berkeley deal that I'm looking at, and I'll share that.
That sounds good. And then, you know, if anybody has something they want to talk about, a specific deal that they think is interesting, or a building they've seen for sale, you can bring it up on the call. We can talk about it as a group. It's fine, or we can talk about it offline separately, just Josh and you and us. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anybody have questions, comments, ideas, thoughts to share?
I do.
Yes.
So, you know, you're talking about all this contracts and everything else. I'm beginning to wonder, when the time comes, what's the point? Because we can't get into, you know, if you think about December, all these people going into court, there's going to be no room. There'll be no place. It'll take months and months to get through the agenda, number one. Number two, once you do get a trial, you're going to have a jury, and the jury isn't going to vote for you. Most of the people are going to be.
Well, I would say, you know, for your first point is well taken, and that's why we have to be reasonable, and we have to settle and you know, get to a point where we can agree on terms with tenants. And that's why the data that we've got, you know, something like 36 tenants who are requesting deferral, kind of gives us a sense that we're not actually, we don't have that many situations that we can't solve. And once again, I'm grateful for all of my clients who have been reasonable and generous with their tenants in trying to work these things out, so that we don't end up in court in 2021 or beyond. So, yeah.
Pick a fight that you can't win.
Well, that's true, but you know, we're not picking the fight either. So, you know, the fight's coming to us, but it's a fight of circumstance, not a fight that's, you know, that anybody's making money on. I mean, there is no money to be made in this unless you're selling, you know, masks or disinfectant or something. So, or you're painting circles out at the park, or, you know, manufacturing plexiglass. Those are the only growth industries right now. Any other thoughts or ideas?
Thank you, Denise, for making everything very clear.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for being on the calls and for helping to make it clear. We appreciate it. All right, well, with that, I will wish you all a great weekend. And for those of you who will be celebrating it, I saw Noah came and joined Josh on the call there for a minute. Happy Father's Day to everybody, to my own father on the call, and everybody else. So thank you, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Bye,
Take care, everybody.